Hey, I'm Nikki. I make chicken keeping pure and simple, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're talking about how to prep your chicken coop for winter. Of course, down below you're going to find links with my favorite companies, some discount codes, favorite products, and all that kind of stuff. And anything I talk about today, I'll link for you as well. Quick housekeeping, you can also follow me on TikTok and on Instagram with the handle Purely Chickens. And I have a Facebook page as well for like-minded chicken keepers who want to find some community and some people to help them out. So today we're going to talk about how to winterize our chicken coop. For a little frame of reference, I'm in zone 6A, I'm in Ohio, and I have 28-ish chickens in my 8x8 coop. And I have a run that is about 15 by 24 and it is covered. So that's what I'm working with here. You might be working with something a little bit different, but that's okay. We'll talk about everything today. Now, I would winterize my chicken coop and run if it got in the 30s Fahrenheit and below. If you are in a climate where it stays in the 40s, I probably wouldn't really worry about it because they can handle that weather just fine. But if you're expecting a lot of snow this year, then winterizing is a really great idea because you don't want the chickens to be hanging out in wet, cold conditions. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that your run is nice and winterized. What I mean by that is you're going to wrap it in some plastic or somehow keep the wind off of your chickens. And it's also going to be a nice place for them to hang out when it's too cold to be walking around in the snow. I don't know about your chickens, but my chickens do not appreciate a nice snowstorm. They like to be where their feet stay dry and they're not getting frostbite. So they'll come out and venture in the snow for a few minutes, but my chickens would rather be in a covered run. Our run does have a nice roof on top of it. If you have a run that does not have a roof, I suggest that you somehow set something up that's going to keep the snow off of them, whether it's tarps or building something, whatever you can do to give them a nice place to hang out that isn't covered in snow is going to be helpful. It's really important to keep your chickens out of the wind. So what I like to do is wrap the outside of my run in plastic, and I do this a couple different ways. Here on the front of my coop, I like to use these corrugated plastic panels. This is going to be really helpful when you don't want it to look unsightly for the neighbors, and maybe you want to save these panels year after year. This is a great way to do it. It's a little bit more of an investment up front, but it can be done. Maybe this year you start with one side of your run and over time you add panels to complete the whole thing, but we just do the front of ours because nobody can see the other sides. Okay, for the rest of the run, we like to use 6mm plastic sheeting. You can find this at a hardware store. We find it in the painter's aisle of Lowe's, but you can find it pretty much anywhere. And you can buy different sizes based on how much you need. This is really nice because it's nice and sturdy. It's not going to rip over the winter. And there's a few different ways to attach it. One way we like to attach it is by using something called wiggle wire. I've linked it down below for you. Wiggle wire is basically tracks. They're metal tracks that you screw into the wood frame, and then you can use these little wires to feed through the tracks and hold the plastic in place. This stuff is so sturdy. It's usually used for greenhouses, but we love it for our chicken run in the winter. Now, another way to attach your plastic is just use a construction stapler. It's really easy. You just staple it into the wood. The only thing with that is you're going to want to make sure that you pick up all the little staples in the springtime so your chickens aren't eating them. If you don't have a stapler and you don't want to use the wiggle wire, just get some scrap pieces of wood and screw those into the frame with the plastic sandwiched in between, and it works really well. Maybe your run is made of metal, like a chain link type situation. In that case, you can use tarps that have grommets in them, use some zip ties, get creative. If you have ideas for that, pop them down below for everybody else. And as you can see here, we do the skirt out method with our plastic. We skirt the plastic out a few feet. That way when we get a heavy snow and the heavy snow melts, it doesn't melt into the run. Now, since my chickens are going to be spending all their time in this run during the winter, I'm going to make sure that they have plenty of places to roost. High, low, medium, that way they can get away from each other. Right now we have this wooden branch in here, but eventually I will add some other places, like you can use straw bales, you can use pallets, you can use children's little Tykes toys, anything that you have, tires, things like that for them to get up off the ground and have different places to hang out. Another thing you're going to want to do in the winter is heat your water for your chickens. Now, you don't have to do this. If you have the ability to come out here a few times a day, break up frozen water, add fresh water, that is totally an option as well. That's not something I like to do because, like I said before, I like to keep chicken keeping pure and simple. So I like to heat my waters in the winter so they don't freeze, and that gives me a few days before I have to come out here again. Now, this is the type of water that we use. It has these little spouts on the edges and it's linked down below. And this is the kind of water that you can use to put heaters in so they don't freeze. So something simple like this that you just kind of drop down through the hole in the top is going to be great. This one's linked below. Mine's a little bit wet because I was just cleaning it for the winter and getting ready. You can also buy a heated waterer that plugs in as well, and then the whole thing kind of stays heated. If you have an open waterer, you can buy those heated as well. You can also buy plates that go underneath it to keep them heated. If you don't have access to a plug out in your coop and you don't want to run an outdoor extension cord to your coop either, you can also use solar power. So what you want to do is you want to look for a big solar panel that you can install on top of your coop or run that has a converter with it as well. Just make sure that you buy enough wattage so it can actually power your waterer. Check and see how much your heated water needs and how much the solar panel covers, and that should help you out. And that's pretty much all I do with the run portion of the coop. The other thing I do is make sure that my coop is prepared for winter, so let's talk about that. I have windows on my coop. I'm gonna make sure that those are closed. Usually when it starts to get around 40 at night is when I close them all the way, but you wanna make sure that they're closed for winter. You also wanna make sure that your coop has good ventilation because your chickens are gonna be creating a lot of humidity in the coop, and that could aid in frostbite. So we don't wanna do that. We wanna make sure that all of that warm air is escaping above the chickens. So no ventilation where the chickens are at their level, but ventilation up high is gonna help the humidity escape. Speaking of humidity, one way that I keep humidity down in my coop is make sure that I have what I call the shit shelf. And this is just a shelf that is underneath the roosts. And the purpose of that is to catch all the droppings from the night, which is where a lot of the humidity is going to come from. And in the morning, I can come out and sift it or scrape it off of the shelf, and it's good for the next night. If you live somewhere with extreme cold, you can try the deep litter method. I'm not an expert in deep litter method because I just don't love it. And so I don't utilize it here where I am. It just doesn't get cold enough for me to justify using it. And it's kind of gross. And if you don't do it right, it can just be a big problem. So research that if you want to know more about deep litter. You can try that as well. I love using this hemp bedding on the floor of my coop. It's a nice soft place for my chickens to land, but chickens don't usually sleep in the bedding like farm animals do. They usually sleep on the roost. If you have chickens who sleep on the floor, yes, by all means, make sure they have nice soft bedding to sleep in, but chickens, for the most part, are not going to be hanging out on the floor sleeping unless there's a problem, or unless you've got like silkies or something like that. So I actually never had an insulated coop before. Here in Ohio, my chickens did just fine without it. But when we built the new coop, we did insulate it because, well, we were building it from scratch, and why the heck not, right? So inside the shed, we have stud walls, and between the studs, we put the real thick foam insulation. Again, that was a free thing that my dad refurbished from, all of his construction supplies, so it was free for us. But then we put plywood over top of it so the chickens wouldn't peck at it. If you don't have the ability to go through all that trouble, you might want to try the foil rolls of insulation that you can get, and that would be good to put like up on the ceiling or on the walls. Just maybe try to keep the chickens away from pecking at it. I had to go get my goats because they were so loud and they knew I was out here. So anyway, the insulation is going to help with a few things. It's going to help to keep the chickens warm in the winter, right? It's also going to help keep the draft off of them. So make sure the inside of your coop doesn't have a lot of drafts that are going to be blowing on the chickens. So go around with a candle in the dark and kind of see where there might be drafts coming in. And you can use insulation, you can use old feed bags, whatever you can do to cover those areas will be perfect. All right, so I know you guys are waiting for it. Do I heat my coop in the winter? The answer here is no. I've never actually added heat into my coop in the wintertime, and there's gonna be lots of opinions on this. A lot of people will use heat lamps. And yes, you may have gone decades without ever having a heat lamp fire, but I have friends who are, in the fire department, and they've always told me, don't use heat lamps. They have caused fires in houses and in sheds and in coops and all sorts of places. And I really just don't want barbecue chicken out of my pets. And even if you think, well, I have it secured really well, the change in temperature that happens in wintertime can cause a bulb to burst. You can cause fires in the bedding. You can send glass shards throughout your coop. It also, you've got flying animals in there as well. So, a feather, if they flap their wings and a feather gets lost and ends up on the bulb, it can catch fires. I know you're going to see comments from people who will back me up on this, who have had fires in their coop before. So if that's you, please share your story below so others may learn from it. But we're not going to be mean about it. If people choose to use heat in their coop, that is on them. There's other things that you can use to heat your coop if you feel like it's super necessary. If your coop is getting below freezing, you might consider adding some heat to it, but not enough to make it feel warm to you as a human, because chickens are a little bit different than us. First of all, their body temperature is much higher. It could get up to like 107 degrees, so they don't need to feel warm like you do. They also have down underneath their feathers, and the down actually keeps them warm. That's why they make blankets and pillows out of it for people. They also will sit down on their feet to keep their feet from getting cold, and they'll tuck their heads under their wings to keep their combs and their wattles warm as well. You might want to consider wrapping your run and doing a full coop clean out on a nice warm sunny day before winter gets too bad, because you don't want to be out here when it's 40 to 30 degrees winterizing your coop. It's better to do it on a nice sunny day, because the inside of the run will be nice and dry and you won't freeze your tail off trying to do it. So one thing to keep in mind if you are going to heat your coop, try to choose a safe heating option, or as safe as possible. There's one that I have linked below called the Sweeter Heater. I have not tried it yet, but the company sent it to me to try, and it looks like it's going to be the best option. It kind of hangs above your chickens and just kind of takes the chill off. You can also use a radiant heating panel as well, and I've linked that one below for you to check out too. If the power goes out in the dead of winter and the chickens are used to the heat, they are not going to be able to regulate their body to keep warm, and so you want to have a backup plan. So if you have a backup generator, make sure it's ready to go for those really bad nights when the power goes down because, you know, we've lost a power line. Let's talk a little bit about frostbite. Chickens can get frostbite in the winter, one, because the weather's below freezing, and two, because there's just too much humidity in the coop. So I've linked below the hydrometer that I use in my coop, and it has the ability for me to check it on my phone. So I can actually see the temperature of the coop, and I can also check what the humidity level is. So around 50% is a great humidity level for your chickens. If the humidity is getting above 70%, 80%, then you might want to look at your coop and see what you can do to reduce that humidity. You can also put a frostbite cream on your chickens as well. If you look down below, there's a link on how to make it, and you can see, you know, all the ingredients that I use if you want to check that out as well. I really only put this on my chickens if it's going to be, you know, below freezing, and I want to just give their combs and their wattles a little extra protection. The last thing I want to talk about today with winter preparation is entertainment for your chickens, and I know that sounds really silly to some of you because chickens in the past have just been farm animals, right? They're just livestock. Like, they'll just do what they do. But if you keep your chickens entertained, especially when they're all cooped up in the wintertime, they're going to have less issues. They're going to be pecking on each other less. They're going to be happier. They're going to be healthier, and it's going to be less trouble for you in the long run. So some things I like to do for entertainment: one, just add some variety to their coop. You can do all those things I talked about to give them extra places to roost, like tree branches, and you can build little roosting ladders, or you can add an old Christmas tree that has no tinsel or hooks on it. You can add old tires, kids play stuff, pallets, all those kind of things for them to just get at different levels for a little bit of entertainment and a way to get away from each other. Another thing you can do is buy or make like a treat dispenser. Treat dispensers are really fun because it kind of gives them some mental stimulation, and they peck at that instead of their friends or themselves. So you can just take like an old water bottle, like just a plastic water bottle, cut some holes in it, add some food. Doesn't even have to be anything special. It can just be their normal feed, and they'll kick it around and peck at it until the food comes out, and that's a great way to keep them entertained. Making fodder is also helpful, and that's just kind of like sprouting seeds in a tray until it grows up a few inches, and it kind of gives them something to peck at that is more like what they would be doing in the summertime in the grass. I also like to take a skewer that you can just kind of put vegetables on. I like to do big heads of cabbage or kale, apples, things like that the chickens would love to peck at, and that just kind of gives them some variety throughout their day. My last tip, which is going to sound kind of crazy because we're trying to keep them safe from winter, my chickens love to peck at a pile of snow. So I'll just take a few shovelfuls of snow and pile it right into their run, and it gives them a little extra hydration and gives them something to do without having to get their feet cold too. Okay, so that's all I have for you today. If you found this useful, I would love for you to like, comment, and share. And as always, we are a kind chicken keeping community here. So if you have thoughts and tips and tricks that have helped your flock out, go ahead and share them in the comments and interact with each other so we can make sure that we are keeping our chickens as safe and healthy as possible. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you learned something today. And until next time, keep it pure and simple.